Welcome to some new r/malicious compliance stories, where people comply to the letter but not the spirit of a request. I hope you had a great day. The first story is called A Great Price. I work in warranty for a farm equipment dealer. When we do mandatory updates, recalls, the manufacturer is obligated to pay us a 25% markup on any parts for it when we claim our reimbursement. They had a recall for some electrical issues in the cab for swatters. The kit we had to install consisted of 2 small harnesses with switches and 7 zip ties, all packaged up in a nice padded envelope. This kit was realistically worth about $40. The problem was, someone at the manufacturer decided they didn't want to pay us parts makeup for this recall, so they priced the kit at 1 cent. That meant we purchased the kit for a single penny, and because of rounding we were reimbursed a single penny. Now, $40 with a 25% markup is peanuts in the grand scheme of all things farm equipment related. But the principle of what they were doing really grinded at me and our parts manager, as they were playing their system to screw us over. So what did our parts manager do? He put in an order for 1,000 more of the kits. We were going to seriously restock the size of zip ties, switches and padded envelopes. They called him up right away to see if he had made a mistake. No, I didn't make a mistake. Why did you make such a big order of this part? That's a great price. Unfortunately, they did not allow him to get his full order. But we ended up with a couple hundred of these kits, and thankfully I've never seen them try the trick again. The next story is called College Rules. Years ago, I attended a very conservative college. We had a new administrator who didn't like that some college students watch movies of either too high a rating or with content he didn't approve. He created a rule that anything watched on campus would have to be personally approved by him. My friend wrote down some general movie studios on 20-something different 3x5 cards, but he said those were too vague and he needed specific movies listed. My friend wanted to create a spreadsheet to post in the college public area so people could more easily see what they were allowed to watch. She sat in that area as she began her list and asked every college student she could to give her their list of movies to be approved. She also worked in the administrator's office, getting paid by the college to do so. And during work she created a spreadsheet and inputted the content people had requested. Then she went to every Wikipedia page she could think of and put every individual movie listed on it. She gave him multiple lists, some lists as long as 30 pages, with each page having about 200 movies listed to be approved. She even put a fancy yes/no checkbox next to each movie to make it easier. He got through about 5 pages before he realized it was more work than it was worth. It was not an enforced rule. I would also like to add that there was one specific movie that he didn't approve that we thought he would definitely approve. We asked him why he didn't approve it, and his response was, "I wouldn't let my 2-year-old watch that." So we don't know what his criteria were for approving content. The third story is called Not My Shift. My girlfriend is a supervisor at a high-end leathers and adult store. There have been a lot of turnovers. Primarily, people her manager hires to open and close for him. My girlfriend is a closer and sometimes opener, or at least she was an opener. She used to go in 2 hours early and help her boss open, and then he would leave and let her finish opening and rack up some overtime. She made a lot of money doing this. 2 of the other openers were planning on quitting, and he didn't know, so he told my girlfriend he no longer needs her to come in 2 hours early anymore. Since he's got all these openers he chose specifically. But then he hired his wife's friend to open. Turns out this friend likes to be 2 to 3 hours late most days, and sometimes just doesn't show up at all, and my girlfriend doesn't actually clock in until 2 PM when the store opens at 12. He realized this once his boss, the owner, started calling him, asking why the store wasn't open when he showed up with boxes of new merchandise and no one in the store to even let him in. Granted, he's the owner, he should have remembered his key. But he was banking on the manager or one of the new openers to be there to help him. And since the manager likes to secretly take off to let the lowers finish his job, he got a bit of a shoeing. The next day, my girlfriend gets a call at 12 PM, because the new opener wasn't there to open, and there were a lot of people waiting to get in. She just told him, "Sorry, my shift isn't until 2 PM, and you said you longer need me 2 hours early." He had to go down and open the store and wait for the new employee. I think he realizes now that the only reason the store was even open on time was because of my girlfriend. She still refuses to clock in before 2 PM now. She's pretty bitter about him just replacing her like that for his wife. The next story is called Free Pension. My family member was a partner in a law firm. The way a lot of law firms work is partners who retire get a pension. It's based on their last few years' average salaries or something similar. This only applies if you truly retire and do not go work somewhere else, and my family member was not near retiring. The two other partners who were in his area of practice at his firm decided to push him out. Instead of trying to come to an agreement for him to leave, they ambushed him in a meeting where they had already drafted exit documents for him to sign. They included some token severance, but basically said, pack your stuff or we are going to make this a huge hostile thing and drag your name through the mud, etc. There's a non-compete clause in a lot of partnership agreements, so you can't leave and take clients and go work somewhere else right away if you are a partner. In their haste to prepare these documents, they negated a bunch of these clauses, so he would be able to work at another firm without waiting the non-compete period. But they missed that some of those clauses were also what govern the part of the pension clause that doesn't let you get the pension if you work for another firm after you leave. Basically, they wrote documents that gave him a pension way early and for the rest of his life, and based on some really good years he'd had for the firm. He noticed this when he read them and knew they messed up, and also knew he would be able to get a job pretty easily. So instead of negotiating or fighting it, he just signed them as is and left. They were very surprised, expecting a huge fight or a long negotiation. He ended up getting another job pretty quickly at a different law firm. He waited a couple of months and then called one of the other partners and said something like, "So, when are you going to start making the payments?" At his age, when this happened, they would have had to pay him a large amount of money every year for maybe 40 to 50 years. Once they went back through and realized what they had forced him to sign, they started making offers to buy him out of his pension. He eventually settled for a multi-million-dollar payout, all because he signed the documents they put in front of him. The last story is called Time Usage. This happened about 10 years ago. I worked at a public university as a professor and researcher. I did not yet have tenure, which means you work like an indentured servant at the beck and call of all the tenured faculty. We had year-round instruction, so I put in 60 to 70 hours per week for years to reach tenure. I eventually did achieve tenure. One of the great parts of my job was teaching a course for undergraduate that involved performing community service work. The students always got to select and design their projects. This was an overload class for me, which gave me a little additional pay. The wages for being a professor are lower than if you work in the profession, so the little extra income really mattered. But I loved training new researchers and making discoveries from my own research. One of the services I provided was consultations with colleagues about their research and publications. I kept my calendar open to be readable so others could book appointments with me and so they could see where I was and what I was doing. We got a new department chair. It was only a matter of weeks before the administrative assistant to the chair decided to try to get me in trouble. She showed my calendar to the new chair, who then met with me to insist my percent of time spent on the undergraduate course not exceed the allowed amount. But the fool of a department chair didn't realize I was putting in less than the allowed amount because it's a percentage. I was working so many hours I could have doubled the amount on this course. So you bet I complied. First, I turned off everyone's view of my calendar, which was hilarious on its own. Second, I showed the chair the actual hours were less than allowed, and the chair ended up crying and apologized. I think the chair felt stupid and humiliated for trying to discipline me. But this wasn't the first time I had been treated this way, and I was pretty angry. So I increased my hours on the undergraduate course and spent more time on volunteer work. This ended up getting some local media attention and even wound up making the chair look good. So the assistant wasn't able to mess with me anymore. About my calendar. The assistant did try one last time to get the better of me by going to the chair about my calendar no longer being readable. She had to schedule meetings and appointments with me, and it was now really hard to do. When the chair came to me about opening my calendar up, I said I would if it's a policy and if everyone else has to do the same thing. Of course, it wasn't a policy, and the chair wasn't about to make everyone do that. So for the remainder of my time there, she had to work extra hard. I often kept my calendar full with work for the undergraduate course, now that I was putting in all my allowed hours. And with that, we end today's video. Let me know what you think about the stories. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the stories and today's video? I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like what I do and want to support me, please subscribe and hit the like button. I hope you have a great day. Stay safe. Bye bye.